Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hey, we're getting ready to build this housing here for the Nova, the Champagne Supernova, and I wanted to go over a few things with you guys to show you exactly how we do it and kind of the process and how we do it. So just a quick overview. I'll show you before I start, and then I'll show you. I'll do a video of actually while we're doing it, maybe do a time lapse or speed it up, because it's going to take me every bit of 2 to 3 days to build this, full days. I mean, that's how much time goes into making these things when they're custom like this. You know, if I was making these all the time, I'd make a fixture and I could bang them out quick, but that's just not how we do it here. Everything we do here is custom. But anyways, before we start, when we make this housing, one of the very first things we need to do is find the length of the housing, what we need to know. And I got something set up in the car. I'll show you in the video later how I did that little trick that I mentioned in the last video, and I'll show you what we do. So anyways, I got that number, and that's the very first thing I did. I usually when I'm doing this stuff, I will just make a small sketch of what I'm doing, and I'll write down all the dimensions so I can keep referring to it while I'm building this. It's real easy to make a mistake when you're doing this because you're dealing with so many dimensions, and in the end it's got to be right. So I refer to that just as I'm building it. Just keep checking my numbers and make sure everything's right as I'm building it. But anyways, the first thing I actually do is I get all my parts out, make sure I have everything, check all the parts, make sure everything's deburred, everything's you know, what I need, and then I'll start. One thing I did here, I want to show you guys, kind of a little tech tip here. If you guys are going to be building houses and stuff, I made this little stand. I made this thing years ago actually, but I still use it to this day. What I do is I bolt this right to the front of the center section of the housing, and I'll put the studs in there. I don't have them in there yet, and I'll bolt that, and then it holds the rear end for me while I'm fitting the brackets and you know, doing the layout of the housing. But I don't use this when I'm actually welding the housing together. I actually got a rear end narrowing jig that we use for that, which is this. And this bolts to the front, and then we got a solid round bar that goes through there, which holds the axle tube straight and also the housing ends straight. And you know, that's critical to use this. You have to do this, otherwise your rear end will be all over the place, and you'll be wearing out axle bearings, and the car won't track straight, and it'll just be a mess. So definitely, if you guys are going to be doing this, you got to get your rear end narrowing jig. You can actually make one, which I did years ago. You could take an old third member of a 9-inch, and you can gut it, and you can use that and make a machine of pucks that goes in where the bearings would go, and then also make you pucks that would go in here that would fit the diameter of the bar that you're going to use that goes through. And then that's a way to do it too. But I got this one here. I bought this years ago too. This was a good one. I think I got this one from Chassis Works, and I actually modified it to do different rear ends, different housing ends. So yeah, I got that here actually. Let me show you. And this is the bar that actually goes through there, and this thing screws on there. But what I did is I machined steps in this for the different housing ends and different axle tubes, because I actually used this jig to put these axle tubes in here, and I machined a register in this end to fit inside the diameter of the tube. That's what keeps the axle tube straight when I weld it down. But you'll see all that when I'm building the actual housing. But these are just the way I do it. I've been doing this for years, and every housing I do, I always seem to find a little bit better way, and I keep refining the way I do things. But that's just the way I do it. I mean, there's no right or wrong way. As long as the end result is what you want, then who really cares how you do it, right? That's just the way I do it. But anyways, one of the first things I'm gonna do here, and I already know because I did some measuring on this, and I already know what I got to do. But I'm gonna take these axle tubes. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take them over to the lathe, and I'm gonna machine a little register on the end of this. And the reason for that is because it's real tight inside of this center section, and I want to be able to move them around just a little bit, so when I put the jig in there, I can get them to go straight. I'm not forcing the jig. You don't want to be forcing the jig in there, because when you weld it, you take the jig out, it's going to be crooked. So you got to make sure everything floats pretty good in there, so everything lines up good, and then weld it. So that's the first thing I'm gonna do. I'll actually probably bring the camera over to the lathe and show you how we do that too. We put this in the lathe, and since this is so long, we're gonna put what's called a steady rest on the lathe. And that actually holds this tube in place with all this overhang hanging out. So you'll see that in the video. Also too, at the end of the video or somewhere in the video, I'm gonna show you how I found the length of the rear end. Little fixture I made using some old axles. You know, it's not rocket science, but you know, when we do these things, when we figure out we need to do something, we might make a fixture, we might make a tool, something like that. We'll do it right on the fly so we can keep moving forward with the projects that we got. We do that a lot around here actually. But so this is it. We're gonna start on this. And in the end, you know, you'll see the finished result, and it's gonna look real cool. It's gonna look like jewelry when we're done. So here's the brackets that I made, all the brackets. I'll still have to fit these for the back brace. But so yeah, so this is it. And then I'll make another video at the end of the deal and show you some other things, and we'll just keep moving forward. Something I want to show you on the rear end, we're moving forward on this, I forgot to mention in the first video, or the first part of the video, is that you got to check what your pinion offset is going to be. And that's a very critical measurement that we need to know, because when we build a house, and we want to know where the drive shaft is going to be in relation to the engine. And so I went over there and I measured, and we have the Smith Racecraft front end, as we said before, and the engine is centered between the frame rails. But a lot of cars, they're not centered, and you need to be aware of that, because we want to have the pinion in line with the engine. So when we're building this housing, you know, the drive shaft, you know, isn't going off on an angle and causing vibrations. But anyways, the pinion on this deal is going to be centered, so it makes it real easy to build this housing. You don't have to do any calculations. It's just basically simple math. But what's nice about this this narrowing jig that I mentioned that we're using is this actually has a machined line in here where you can hook your tape measure to get the center of the pinion. That part is already figured out for you. So this makes this real easy to do. So I'll just show you what I do real quick, and it's just to double check your measurements. So I know without the ends on that my housing is going to be 42 3/4 inches. So what I'll do is I'll take half of that, which is 21 3/8, and I'll just measure from the center line of my pinion, 21 3/8. I'll make a mark, and then I'll measure over here, 21 3/8, and I'll make a mark. And just to verify that my dimensions are right, because like I said before, it's critical that you get this right, and it's easy to make a mistake. So just to double check your measurements, just go back across your 2 marks and make sure that is the measurement that you're looking for, which is 42 3/4, which is right on the money. So now what I'm gonna do is, I got my marks here, is I'm actually gonna cut this off. I'm gonna leave myself maybe about 60 thousandths on my mark. I'm gonna cut these ends off, and what I like to do is I'll take these tubes back out and I'll go bring them back to the lathe, and I'll machine them to the exact length that my housing is gonna be without the housing ends on. And what's nice about that is down the road, when you're coming up to the finished part of the building the housing, when you go to weld your ends on, that the length of the housing is already done for you. It's already figured out, and you've already did that in the steps prior. And the best part about it is you have a machined end now. And with the machined end, where is my housing ends? With the machine end on it, when you go to put your housing end on it, it's going to be leave for a nice weld. Where is the? Oh, there it is. So, anyways, we got the machined housing end. So when you have this part of the tube machined, it sits perfectly flat, and you can get a nice weld on here. And the thing is if you don't get that perfectly flat, if you were to build a housing and you were to cut that off with, say, a bandsaw or handheld cut-off wheel, you got a good opportunity to go off, and it'll be an angle cut. And what's going to happen is if you put these ends on and you weld that up, the end is going to pull, because when you weld, it actually will pull and it will close any gap that you got. And even if you have that jig in there and that housing end is on, your housing end is going to be crooked, and what could happen is you wear out bearings, or your brakes will be dragging. So it's critical that we get that on there straight, and I like to take that extra step to take these out, machine them, and then that part's done, and then we'll move on to the next step, which will be marking out for the brackets and start installing the brackets. But anyways, that's a good little tech tip for you guys. That's what I like to do. You don't have to do it that way, but I find that that way works really good, and it works good for me. So that's it for this part of the video, and I'm gonna set up the camera as I'm building this, and then you guys will see the process, and then I might stop along the way and explain a few things, and then at the end you'll see the finished product. Okay, so we're continuing on with this 9-inch housing build, and so you saw in the previous in the video that I cut the axle tubes. I cut both of them. I took them to the lathe, and I machined them to the exact size that they needed to be. So when we end up putting them in this in the housing, the center part here, they will be the exact length without the housing ends on once it's all welded. And what I wanted to show you in this part of the video is when I'm going to put these in here, and there's actually a little bit of a trick here when we go to weld. And this is something when you get a lot of hours of welding, you get good at it, you'll pick these things up, because you'll see how when you weld something, how it reacts, because when you weld something, it will want to pull whatever you're welding. So when it pulls, you want to counteract that. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually, when we start welding this, we're going to probably weld, we might weld here and then come back over here and weld the same spot on the opposite side, and then we'll move back over here and we'll probably weld this one, and then I'll come over here and I'll weld the one diagonal to that, and then I'll just keep doing it. I'll flip back and forth, because what's going to happen is if you were to just come in here and just weld crazy and just weld that all on one side, flip it over, weld the other, that too for sure on the first side that you weld, it's going to pull it that direction. And when you go to weld the other way, it's not going to pull it back completely the amount that it pulled the first time you welded it. So that's why you want to kind of skip back and forth. And when we get farther in the build, I'm going to explain the same thing with the back brace, because it's critical that you do that, because the longer the back brace is, the more heat you get into it, and the more warpage you'll have, or more pull you'll have when you're welding that back brace, and that will also warp the housing. So these are some little tech tips I like to give you. You know, these are just things that you'll learn over the years, and it makes a difference between making, you know, a nice housing and one that's, yeah, looks good, but is really, you know, is a mess as far as dimensionally. So, you know, little tech tip there. Works good, and works good for me. So we're gonna knock these tubes in right now, and I'm gonna show you this. This is the receiver that I machined in there earlier that I was telling you about, and that's way it fits a little bit looser inside this the center part of this housing here. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna line it up, and then I'm just gonna knock it in. You hear the thud, that's when you know it's bottomed out. I also scribe a line too, just in case, because you can't see inside to see if it's bottomed out, but I can hear it. I know it is, but I also scribe one just for, you know, just for extra security, knowing that it drove it home. There, check my dimension. Perfect, 42 3/4. So that's that for right now. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put in the bar that I mentioned earlier, which I machined this step in here to fit on the inside diameter of the tube. And I'm gonna tighten it all down, and then I'll start welding one side. I'll let it cool. I'll take the bar out. I'll put it in the other side, and then I'll let it cool. And then the next step is critical. And we're gonna be putting the back brace on. There's a little trick I'm gonna show you on that one too. And all this stuff, these little tricks, man, it pays off in the end. What I wanted to show you at this point is this side is all welded up. We have the narrowing fixture in here and it's totally cooled off right now. And what I want to show you is when you weld it the way I welded it, what I showed you, you know, moving from one side to the next and moving around, and we basically were controlling the warpage of this. So now I want to show you that's totally cool how straight it really is and how this really did work good. So this this housing and part of the jig is threaded on this bar. So actually I can unscrew this and you can see that screws in and out and very easy. It goes right into the register like that. So that thing is perfectly straight. And if I wasn't doing it the way I did it, this would be off and this thing wouldn't be able to screw in there. It would be moved over and I wouldn't be able to screw that on there. That just shows you, if you take your time and you think about you know, what you're doing, and when you're welding, you know, which way it's pulling and trying to counteract that, it'll actually it'll work out perfect for you. But just take some time, take some practice to do it. But you know, the more you do, the better you'll get. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna come around, I'm gonna grab the camera, I'm gonna walk around, and I'm actually gonna show you the weld. And this is what your weld should look like when it's done. So what I wanted to show you on this step is how we actually weld this back brace on. And this part of the process is pretty critical because what will happen is if you weld this straight through, you'll definitely end up warping the housing, and that ain't gonna be good for you. So this is a method that I do, and it works pretty good. So we fit the back brace on here, and what we do is we actually bolt down the housing. As you can see, we got these U-bolts here. We bolt it down to the table, and also to the center part of the jig I use, and we also bolt that down to the table. And what that does is hold this all straight, because when you weld on this back brace, being that it's on the back side of the housing and all the weld and the heat is concentrated here, it's going to want to bend the housing tubes up like that. And you know, the longer the housing and the longer the back brace, the more warpage you're going to get. So to control that, this is how we battle that. We bolt this thing down, and then I also take another step, just like I showed you when I welded these axle tubes on. I'll take my time and I'll weld one side. I'll let it cool, and then I'll come over here and I'll weld this side, let it cool, and then vice versa. So I'll kind of like jump around to try to control the flex. So pretty simple deal, but it's something that definitely you should do, and that will help eliminate the warpage of the housing. Another thing I want to show you is these blocks here that I use. These things are awesome, man. These are called 1, 2, 3 blocks. They're machine blocks, and the reason why they're called 1, 2, 3 is because they're 1 inch, 2 inch by 3 inch, and they're real handy when you're doing stuff like this. You know, we put them under here. We use them all the time for when we need to you know, use something to measure off of, you know, or shim something, and these are real accurate for that. And you can get these on Amazon, but we use them all the time. We got a bunch of these. So a little tech tip for you guys. But that's it for this part of the build, and we're going to move on to the next part next. That's going to be fitting the brackets. We'll take this off. We'll put the housing up on the stand that I showed you in the first video, or the first part of the video, and then I'll fit all the brackets, and then I'll put the jig back on, and then I'll start welding the brackets. But that's it for this part, and we're on to the next. Okay, something real quick I want to show you guys. So I unbolted it from the table, and I put the actual the bar in there for the jig, and I wanted to show you guys real quick how good this method really works. And this thing is absolutely perfect. As I told you before, I machined a receiver groove in this end for the jig, and it screws on, and this receiver groove literally just goes right inside the axle with no effort. You can see it's absolutely perfect. But I just want to show you that real quick to show you how critical it is when you weld that back brace, and if you bolt it down like that, it holds it real straight, and it's going to be real nice for you. I'll actually come around and grab the camera, bring it around, and show you a close-up view. So you can see that's the receiver groove in there. I mean, like perfect, effortlessly goes inside there. That housing's perfectly straight. we got everything, the back rest welded on, and then also too, this is that stand I was telling you that I built, and this is it's a real nice piece just for when you want to slip these brackets on. So what I did was I fit these brackets, and I'm getting ready to weld these together. But before I do that, I wanted to show you. So I made these spacers that are going to get welded in between these brackets, and that's what's going to hold these things together. So I'll actually weld these together before I even put it on the housing. But anyways, I cut these brackets so they'll slip over the back brace. So slotted here, cleaned them all up, and then also sandblasted these brackets also. That way, when you weld, you'll have a nicer weld, because these brackets are made from 836 mild steel, and they come with a mill scale on the brackets. And the problem with that mill scale is when you try to weld over the mill scale, you'll actually get undercut on your weld. For whatever reason, it does not like to weld on that mill scale. So you can either sandblast it off, or for guys that don't have a sandblaster, another little trick you can do is you can put the brackets in muriatic acid, and it takes about 10 minutes. It'll eat that right off. But just forewarning, if you're messing with muriatic acid, better wear some breathing material there, because it's pretty nasty stuff. But muriatic acid does work pretty good. But anyways, we sandblasted it. We're getting ready to put these on. So I'm going to weld these sleeves in here before I put it on. And then also a little tech tip here. What I always like to do is when I'm putting these brackets together, I will either use the rod ends, or I will make spacers like this to put in between there to weld these up, and I'll bolt it all together. When I make these spacers, I usually make them about 25 thousandths bigger than what the rod end will be. And the reason for that is, if you just sandwich these plates on the rod ends and you weld it all up, and you go to put your rod ends back in, they're not going to fit. You're going to be fighting it, trying to force it in, because when you weld it, it wants to shrink it together. And so we just add that little bit extra spacing in there, so when it's all welded together, then your ladder bar or your 4-link bars or your shock mount will slide in real easy, and it just makes it way nicer when it comes to final assembly. But on these, I use the actual rod ends on this one. So what I got these 25,000 spacers, and I just sandwiched them in there between there, tighten it up, and it's the same as if you made the spacer 25 thousandths longer. So these are the brackets I'm getting ready to weld on there. I want to show you another thing that I do, a little tech tip also. So once you figure out the width of your either 4-link or ladder bar brackets, in this case it's going to be ladder bar brackets, I actually mark the housing all the way around so I can line up my brackets. And this comes real useful, because when you go to put this bracket on, you're putting it on here, like this, you'll always find the problem that you have to get it, you have to get it square this way, and you have to get it square this way. And if you don't have that line on there as a reference, it's going to be real hard to do. So what I do is I take the width of the housing, I'll subtract the outside width of the ladder bar bracket, and then I'll divide that by 2, and then I'll just take my calipers and I'll put it at that dimension, whatever that is, and I'll take a Sharpie and I'll color in on the housing tube so I can scratch it. And the Sharpie actually works pretty good. You can use Dykem or layout fluid, whatever you like, but I find that just a Sharpie works good. So then I'll take my my calipers and I'll put it to the dimension that I need, lock it in. And what's nice about this is a machined surface on this side from earlier when we machined that. And if you just take this and you scratch it around like that, you'll put you a nice square line all the way around, and that will give you the actual distance. And then you can verify it once you got them both scribed on both sides, and make sure that it's the width of your outside of your brackets. Another little tip is I like to use these. These things come in handy. These are machinist squares. We use these all the time here. Different sizes. So once you got your bracket on there, you can take this machinist square, you butt it on there, and you can also use that to get you squared up. But this line that I that I put on there, man, is real useful. And I do it on every rear end that I built, but you can see it here. I don't see it, but colored it in with the Sharpie, and then I got a nice fine scratch line on both sides, and that's going to be the width of my brackets. And again, this stand comes in real handy, you know, when we do that. Another thing you can do, you can use this digital level. You can put that on your bracket too. And when I made these brackets, I made it so this part right here for the shock mount is going to be perfectly parallel to the front machine face of this housing. So, you know, if I put a square on this housing and I get that totally square to the table, which what I would do if it was off, I would put the square on there and I would just put shims back here and shim it to what I needed. And then when I put this bracket on here, I could take this and then I could put that on there, and I can also get, you know, my 90 degrees that way. So I use a combination just to double check my measurements, make sure everything is good, and then I start tacking it. And then what I would do is I would just tack everything first, make sure everything is right, and then I'll start welding. But I won't just go crazy and weld like I was telling you before with the back brace and the tubes. I'll kind of skip around to do that. And also, before I start welding this, I'll make sure that my narrowing jig is in there. I'll actually, once I have all the brackets on there, I'll actually take it back off this stand, put the other jig back on there, put the bar in there, and then I'll weld up one side, then I'll let it cool, I'll take the bar out, and I'll put it on the other side, and I'll weld that up. And then when that's all done, the very end part of the process would be putting the ends on. And we'll do a video on that too at the end. But that's where we're at right now. I'm gonna weld these together, then I'm gonna get them on there, and then I'm gonna start welding that. That will be what I'm gonna do right now. And then after I get that on, then we'll move on to the bar for the anti-roll bar. And I'll show you how we're gonna do that too. But that's also what's nice about having the anti-roll bar on the bottom here, is I'll be able to use that bar, I'll cut it to length, and that will also help me true up my brackets. So that makes it a little easier to do it that way when you have that on there. Okay, so we're coming up to the last steps of this 9-inch build. I'm gonna show you a few more things here. So we got the jig in here, and we still have it in here. We welded up the brackets. Now I'm getting ready to, I let this cool, I'm getting ready to take this out, and then the next step is we are gonna start working on the anti-roll bar, which I already got this bar made, where it's gonna slip inside it here, and we're gonna put these bushings in here, these bearing bushings. These are actually oil impregnated bronze bushing, which it's pretty cool. As this heats up, actually releases oil, and it actually will lubricate that, so it'll always be lubricated. So these will get welded together. I'll machine some tubes to go in here to space these out for the spacing for the rod end that will be in there. And then this bearing will go in there, the bar, and then these arms. And these will actually be like this when it's all said and done. After that, next step will be we'll put on the fill cap, put that there. We'll put a vent in it. We'll cap off these ends. I'll also make a little brace here at the bottom here between the bottom of the housing and this tube. And one thing I did, I want to show you guys, is I actually machined a little block between the bottom of the housing and this tube. And the reason why I did that is, typically when I don't have the anti-roll bar on the bottom, I'll have a tube across the bottom, and that's a nice place to put the jack when you're jacking the car up. But you really don't want to be jacking up on your anti-roll bar and jacking the car and take a chance of bending that. So what I did was I machined a little block to go between the space of the tube and the bottom of the housing. And what that's going to do for us is when we do jack up off of that, it's gonna be supported against the bottom, and then there's going to be no chance of that bending when you jack the car up. But that's just, something you want to think ahead about different things when you're building this kind of stuff. Think ahead and do some things like that. I could even take another step and I could make a little mount or something to jack off, but I didn't want to do that. This is going to work just fine. But that's it. We're coming to a close on this. After all that, Then we put the ends on, and then this thing will be done. This will be the very last process. We'll put the ends on. Now, when you go to put the ends on, it's not a big deal if this housing, when you weld these brackets on, if it moved a little bit. I mean, there's going to be, sometimes you're going to get some distortion in this, because the thing is, when you weld these brackets on, you're not welding all the way around this tube. You're welding partially on the back brace and basically like 3/4 way around the tube. And the problem with that is, when you're welding around a tube, if you were welding continuously around, you would have less chance of it warping anyway. But when you weld 3/4 around, it's got a chance of wanting to pull, because it's going to pull in the direction of your weld. So if it does move a little bit, it's not the end of the world, because when we put the ends on, we're going to have the jig on there, and that's going to keep everything straight. You know, if this does warp, they're going to warp equally, and it's not going to be that big of an issue. We're talking like a 1/16 or less. But you know, so we're going to do that at the very last thing. We're going to put the ends on, and that will be the very last step. One little thing I want to show you guys, cool little tech tip here, and this will help you guys out with these fills. Now, you can use these in tanks, or, you know, if you get an aluminum bung, you can put them in valve covers. But what happens is, when you weld these, sometimes these threads will get distorted when you weld them, and then you can't get the cap on here. A cool little tech tip for you guys: what you do is you take some valve lapping compound and you put it on the threads, and then you just keep working this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And actually what that will do, it will actually relieve those the pressure on those threads, and you'll allow you to screw that in no problem. It takes about 10-15 minutes sometimes. Just keep working it, keep working it, keep working it, and eventually it'll work really smooth for you. And then you'll clean all that off, put a little grease on there, and you'll be good to go. So that's a cool little tech tip. And then the one last thing I want to show you guys is, and I mentioned it earlier, was how I found the dimensions of the width of the rear end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take the camera over to the car, and we're going to go over there, and I'm going to show you this, just a quick little fixture that I made, and then show you how we get that dimension. And it works real well, because when you got cars that you have the wheels real close to the outer lip of the quarter panel, you got to get that measurement just right, because if you don't, and you say you just threw the tires up there and you're trying to measure and you're trying to shim the tire, getting it level on that, you could be off on your measurement. And then when you build your housing and you go put it all together in the car, and then you realize, oh shit, you know, it's gonna rub. So you know, this is gonna help prevent that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go grab the camera, I'm gonna walk over to the car, and then I'll show you those quick little things. And then at the end of this, after I get done doing this, I'll do another quick video, and that'll probably be the end of it, and that'll show you the finished product. So let me grab the camera, and we'll go look at that. Okay, now we're back at the car here, and what I want to show you here is, so we got the tires up in there, and we put these wood blocks in there on the inside of the frame rail for the spacing that we want. And the way when we made these frame rails, we have plenty of room for this 29-10-5 slick here, but we put the blocks in there to get the spacing we want, and then we also will check on the outside from the you know, the bulge of the slick to the lip of the quarter, or the inside of the quarter, to make sure that ain't gonna rub. And I try to keep like a 1/2 inch. That's the number that I always shoot for, is a 1/2 inch, and you're usually good to go, and you're never gonna rub. But so now I'm gonna come under here, and I'm gonna show you the little jig that we did. If you can see that. So basically all it is some old axles, and then we have a tube that slips pretty tight to the axle, and we drilled and tapped the bolts into the tube, and so we can slide them axles in and out, so we can hold them tires to the exact width that we want. And they also say nice and square in the car when you do it that way. So just a little tech tip for you guys. If you know you're building cars, this will be a lifesaver for you. We got a bunch of axles, different ones, different patterns, and we use for different cars. It works out real well. Okay everyone, so here's the finished product. Just finished welding it. Actually, I got the jig still in here. The thing's still a little warm right now. But as you can see, turned out pretty good. And I got the anti-roll bar down here. Works nice and smooth. And then one thing we always do too on every rear end that we build, we put a serial plate on it with serial number. And we document that. But that's it for this build. I appreciate you guys watching. And if you guys like to see more of this kind of stuff, please like and subscribe. And we'll keep doing them. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.